Hey everyone, as you can see, we are not in the basement this morning. We are going to be installing a product that was sent to me from a company called IBEX. They make hop, blueberry, strawberry trellises. And so they sent me their hop trellis. And so today in this video, we're going to install that. And I'm going to show you how it's done, what I go through in the process, and share everything along the way. So let's get going. So one of the things that you definitely want to make sure that you do before you go and start setting this system up is you definitely want to call 811 or whatever your call before your dig number is. Call a few days in advance before you plan the project and be safe and call them and just make sure that the area you're going to install it in is free of any underground wires or pipes or hoses or anything like that. So let's get to it. All right, so to get started installing the IBEX trellis system, you want to measure out your space. Put a couple of stakes in the ground. For the 15-foot system, you want to measure 34 feet. So I measure 34 feet, and then you want to put a string in between those two, kind of an alignment guide, if you will. And then if you purchase the option, then you can lay out your landscape fabric. And they do make a really great landscape fabric. This stuff is really heavy duty, and you know, they did send it to me with the kit. So I went ahead and did that. You want to align the landscape fabric. There's a bunch of lines on there. Align your center line on your fabric with your string, and then to secure your fabric down, they make some stakes that you can put in the ground. Put those every couple of feet, and then you're ready to move on to the next step. One quick note on placement: hops love sun, so if you can orient them in an east-west fashion so that they get the arc of the sun all day long. All right, so after you got everything laid out, you can measure the distance between your stakes, and with my 15-foot trellis system, it's 34 feet, so I measure 17 feet in between. And then for the 15-foot system, you want to find 7 foot 6 inches on either side. So you're going to measure from your center flag, 7 foot 6 inches to the left, 7 foot 6 inches to the right. For the 30-foot trellis, it'll be 15 feet in either direction. So then once you do that, then you can remove your stakes and your string and all that stuff because you've got everything in alignment at that point. So move on to the next step. Okay, so the next thing that you want to do is you want to get out your landscape auger that's supplied with the kit, and you want to drill 2 holes, and these holes are going to go where the 7 foot 6 inch flags are. The directions are not 100% clear. They say center flags, but basically it's the 2 flags that you measured off 7 foot 6 inches. So you want to put your holes there. The other thing that's important is to get these holes plumb or straight level. And you know, you can have a friend watch you, or you can use a level to make sure that you start the bit in the proper direction. One of the things that I've learned using augers to dig holes is that you got to clear the hole out every once in a while. So as you're drilling down, if you kind of jerk the drill up out of the hole and get all the dirt out of there, your auger is going to have a lot better performance because it's only going to be pulling what's down at the bottom of the hole up, as opposed to all the dirt that's in the hole. So try that technique and see if it doesn't help you. I've got some pretty tough clay here, so I had to do that, pulling up and down on the auger so that I could clear the hole out. But once I got done, it was no problem to get all the way to the bottom. And you want to sink that thing all the way down to the arbor on your drill. I mean, so go as deep as you can and just make sure that the holes are straight up and down, and we'll get to the next step. All right, so driving in the first post, there is a driving assistant or drive rod, if you will, that you put down inside of the fiberglass pole. And that's to keep the pole from being damaged while you're driving it in. So insert that into the end of the pole, put the bottom of the pole into the hole, and you'll know the bottom because there's a red line. And you're gonna want to drive that down into the hole until that red line is flush with the ground. And you want to take periodic measurements to make sure that it's level both directions, because you don't want your trellis to be, you know, all cattywampus, as my dad used to say. So do that on the first one, and then when you're done with that one, move on to the next one, just checking to make sure that everything is nice and square. Another thing too, make sure that the square part of the post is perpendicular or basically even with the fabric that you got running, because of the fact that if it's twisted or whatever, then your trellis can move up and down in funny directions. So just make sure that it's square to the fabric and then they'll be square to each other, and then everything is going to come together a little bit better for you. One more thing, make sure that the holes are running the same direction as the fabric is, or your center line, because you're going to want to put your pivot plates are going to go right here, so make sure that those holes are lined up just like that. One important step before you continue to installing the side plates, put the stabilizers, they're these aluminum wings that have a square hole in them. Slide those down over the post. Don't hammer them into the ground yet, but you definitely want to make sure you put those on before you get started with the rest of it, because if you don't, you're going to have to take everything back apart. So make sure you don't miss that step. Just slide those over there, let them sit on the ground, and we'll attend to those in just a little bit. All right, so installing the plates, you want to make sure that the rounded part is up, and then depending on which way you want the trellis to pivot, you'll put the lower side hole to whichever side you want to pivot. So if you wanted to pivot that way, you put it to the back. For me, I want it to pivot down this way, so I'll put it to the front. And then the bolt goes on the inside of the plate, and that'll come through the post here. And then on the outside, make sure that you have your holes oriented in the same way as both ends. I've already got the one end on, so make sure they're oriented the same way. And then these get the washers and the nuts on the outside of the trellis. And these are 7/16. Both the nut and the bolt are 7/16. So you'll run those down until they're tight, and you don't have to tighten them super tight because they are a locking nut, so they should not back out. All right, so the next step, installing the trellis arms. This is a little bit confusing in their instructions, but basically what I have determined from looking at several of the images, you've got these plates on the inside and the outside of this upright bar, the trellis bar. The two plates on the inside that are kind of coinciding with each other, those you want to go on the inside of your space. So both the outside, the single outside ones, are going to go to the outside of the trellis. So those will install and actually go into the center of the hole, and it's just a matter of lining up the holes, and you install these in the down position basically. All right, there we go. And then these are going to go like that. So I'll put the other one on and we'll keep going. Oh, one more thing on these. They don't need to be super tight because you want this to be able to move, because this thing is going to have to pivot up and down. All right, so one of the next steps before you go any further, measure the distance between the poles at the base and then the poles, the trellis uprights, all the way out at the end, and make sure that they're relatively close. I mean, they don't have to be exact because there's a little bit of play in there, but make sure they're like within an inch or two of each other. If they're way out like a foot or something like that, then you know your pivots are either twisted or your poles are sticking way out. So make sure and correct that before you go any further. Okay, so once you've made sure that all your posts and everything are straight, then you want to install the ground stabilizers, and those are those flat aluminum pieces that we slid down over the top before we got putting the plates and everything on. Cut a slit in the fabric if you're using fabric, and then drive those down alternately on either side until they're basically flush with the ground. What that's going to do is going to help stabilize the posts, make sure that they're not twisting and shifting around while the wind is blowing and all that. So on to the next step. All right, so the next step is installing these blocks or stops, and what I suggest on that is rest the post on your shoulder and then install the block in between the two plates, and this basically is going to hold the post, the trellis post, from actually falling all the way over to the ground. And one thing I did on the first one was I went ahead and let it rest down so that this block is flush, which will mean it'll be at an angle in the plates, but I think I like having more surface area up against the pole by letting them auto orient that way. And then just tighten these down and you're ready to move on to the next step. And then the next step is securing the rear blocks into their respective holes. Washer and the nut on the outside. Tighten those down, and then just repeat that for both sides. Now for securing the trellis, there is a torpedo looking type apparatus that has a spring attached to it. And what you're going to do with that is you're going to take the supplied rod and stick it into the slot or the hole in this torpedo shaped anchor and drive it all the way down into the ground. Leave enough of the rod for you to be able to remove it once you get it driven in. Probably about 3 or 4 inches, something like that. Just make sure you leave enough to get it out. And then once you're done with that, you're going to grab a hold of the spring and give a good pull on it to set the anchor into place, and then you can proceed. All right, so the next step is to insert the 15-foot cables for the ground anchors into the uprights. Now, as we talked about before, I have all these holes oriented a certain way, and the reason for that is these holes are actually a grip system that holds the cable. So what you want to do is insert it into the gripper there, and then push it through until you have about 3 or 4 inches on the other side. And then we're going to hook it up to the ground cable with the supplied gripper device that they have in the kit. All right, so we got the gripper on the one side of the ground anchor cable, and basically it just slides through the largest hole, and you're going to slide it through, and then you'll leave about 3 or 4 inches on either side. And don't tighten these up yet. They're not ready to be tightened, but just slide them through and get them ready, and leave them laying off to the side there. All right, so next up is installing the temporary or the support blocks, and basically they hold it in place whenever it's in the upright position. And there's these little clevis pins or pins that go in there. So slide those down, slide the pin through there, and then raise your post up and find the hole, slide your pin through. There we go. And now we have our trellis in the full upright position. All right, the next thing you need to do is tighten the support wires for the trellis. And basically you do that by pulling on the 2 wires in the little, whatever that pin, whatever that clevis thing is that they supply. I think it's a speed clip, or I can't remember what it's called, but anyways. So do that. Probably best to have someone help you, and you hold a level up against the upright as they're pulling on it to make sure you don't go too far. You don't want the 2 poles splayed. Slightly might be okay because you're going to put a wire in between to retain them, but just tighten those back up. If for some reason you go too far and it's too tight, they do make a little tool you stick into the end of the clevis mechanism, and it will release the pressure on there. So just be aware, if you do need to, you can loosen the tension on there and kind of recover from over tightening the supports. Installing the bracing wires between the 2 posts is pretty easy. The one that braces the top is the farthest at the end of the upright post. You're going to simply put in your wire in there and stretch it across. They did send me some extra long wires. I think they might have sent me wires for the 30-foot kit rather than the 15-foot kit, so you'll see some hanging off there, and I did have to cut that off. So once you do that, and then you'll also install the wire that goes for the middle, the cross brace in the middle. That one goes on there the same way, and then you just proceed on with the rest of it. All right, so once you've determined that your posts and everything are pretty much in the same place as far as distance apart, you can go ahead and install the secondary support, which goes in the second hole up at the top, and you connect one of the 13-foot pieces of coated cable, which they're all labeled, which is very nice. Connect one of those and run it down to a piece of the 3-foot cable that has a carabiner on it, and you're going to connect that to the spring support or spring anchor in the bottom. And then don't tighten any of that stuff yet. Now what I did, they say in the instructions to raise it back up again, but you just got to lower it back down again in order to put the hop bind wires on. So what I did was I went ahead and just put the hop bind wires on and got those in place. Just space them out enough along the way. Put enough hop binds on there for however many plants you have, and then you should be good to go and raise it back up. And let's take a look and see what it looks like after everything is installed. After you raise it back up, you want to install the binds, or put the bind wires, kind of basically stick those in the ground so you can have them near where your hop plants are. All right, so that was a trellis installation, and then it's time for the hops now. One of the interesting things that IBEX does is they actually sell 2-year-old plants. So when you buy plants from them, or you buy the kit with plants, you get 2-year-old crowns. Basically, that's the whole plant, the root system, everything. And I'm going to go ahead and transplant them from the container that they come in into a burlap sack. Or it's not a burlap sack, it's some type of a cloth material that's made for growing things. It is porous enough that water runs out, but it also contains enough water to keep the hops saturated and growing. Now, they sent me 6 different varieties in their Midwest pack, and that is Comet, Cascade, Crystal, Fuggle, Mount Rainier, and Nugget. When you go to plant them, basically you just want to, I'm using Miracle-Gro topsoil or potting soil, which is probably overkill, but I just wanted to try to give these things as good of a start as possible because I'm getting started a little bit late in the season. But you can use potting soil, topsoil, even dirt from your own yard if you want to. Fill up the bag and then put your hops in, and you don't really want to cover the top of it because they're pretty much a top growing plant, so they like to be near the surface of the ground. So fill it up, do all that, backfill in around it just to make sure everything is nice and level. You're going to want to water these things really good before you are done with the initial setup of the bags. Okay, so now for putting the hops on the vine, if you've never grown hops before, like I said earlier, they grow in a clockwise fashion. And so what you'll do is you'll find probably your strongest vines. One of the things you want to be very careful of is not to break the end. If you break the end, then it kind of stops that particular vine from growing. There are a couple more. I may let some of these grow out a little longer and see if I can get them to wrap around the vine and see the wire and see how they do. But I'll let those grow for now. Just keep them watered. They don't like too much water, but just keep them slightly moist. Maybe every 3 or 4 days, check the water. Check the soil and see how it feels. And if as long as it's not dried out, you're probably pretty good. But if it starts to dry out, you definitely want to pay attention to that and get them some water. So here are my thoughts on the system. It is expensive, but I think you do get a lot for what you pay for. I have built trellises and whatnot out of wood, and this is a couple, $200, maybe $300 more than what I would wind up spending for long 4x4 posts and cabling and securing stakes or auger, whatever you want to call them, to secure the thing so it doesn't sway back and forth. And the problem with those, where this excels in my opinion, is that you can tilt this down, and if you've never harvested hops before, the vines, when they get really thick, they get a lot of, I don't know what, for lack of a better term, thorns on them. They're not thorns like a rosebush thorn, but they're very rough. And if you cut the vine down from hanging way up in the air and have it laying on the ground, they're really difficult to try to harvest from the ground. This way, with this system, it leans over. You can pick them from basically eye level and have a lot easier time doing the harvest on it. So it might not be for everybody, but I certainly think if you've got the space and the budget to do it, this thing is going to last you for a really, really long time. But I definitely think it is a decent proposition for growing hops. The one thing, there are a couple issues that I had with it that I let them know about, and they said they have since corrected those. One of the bolts for the uprights where the plates go on actually had one of the nuts break off on that. It seemed like they were maybe a little bit low of a grade. They've since fixed that. The other issue that I had kind of was fixed in the box, but the clips that you put the bind wires in with, some of those break sometimes. More of an annoyance than it is really an issue, because they do send more than what you need. They don't send just the minimum on that. So, as far as everything goes, it went up easier than I thought. Hopefully this guide will help you be successful in setting it up, because the instructions are a little vague in some places, and I'm actually going to give them some feedback, so maybe they'll do something with that. But hopefully this video gives you an idea of what it's going to take to set it up, and just what you need to do to set it up. So if you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you're growing hops, leave me a comment down below what hops you're growing. I'd be curious to know what varieties you have going on. These are going to be interesting to see if I get any cones, because I'm starting so late in the year. But this has been Brian for Short Circuited Brewers. We'll see you on the next video.